Hello everyone, my name is Marta Dimitrova and I'm the editor of Future Travel Experience. In this session, we will focus on what the next generation of airport facilities will look like post-COVID-19 and what technologies they will utilize. So it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator of this session, David Blackwell, who is the Executive General Manager, Technology and Innovation at Adelaide Airport. David, over to you.
Good morning, thanks Marta. Good morning everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're watching this. And thanks to FTE and APEX Global for the opportunity to, present, but also to be part of a panel of key industry representatives who I think have a very broad understanding of how our industry fits together. I'd like to introduce the panel just briefly. I have Mike Byrom, Vice President Airport Services at Spirit Airways, who's representing the airline's perspective. We've also got a major technology provider in Chris Forrest, who's Vice President Airports and Unmanned Aerial Systems at Collins Aerospace. And finally, representing the built form and how our various customers use our infrastructure and their facilitation points, we have Antoinette Nassopoulos-Erickson, the Senior Partner at Foster & Partners. So welcome everybody.
Good to be here, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So if I may just lead off with a brief introduction, I guess, to set the scene. We've all seen the massive impacts that COVID-19's had on our industry and the travel industry as a whole. From massive shutdowns, layoffs across the board, there's really not any part of our industry that hasn't been affected. We all know this stuff. Billions of dollars have been lost, and right now many parts of the world are heading into winter with a real uncertainty around the next few months. In our recent experience, we've seen some very clever innovation come through, I guess due to necessity and the pressing need to immediately reduce costs, scale down our services, but also improve operational efficiency wherever possible. But when I look at COVID-19, I guess in the context of this panel and the question that Marta had set initially, I propose that we've been here before, and history's taught us that not much is likely to change after the impact has started to subside. And I'll give you an example. 9/11 really was a material impact on our business, and globally it had an impact. Yet there was dramatic changes in security, but the rest of the processes, I would suggest, at the core, haven't really changed a lot. And some of the points I think are worth considering is airports, ground handlers and airlines still use common use services that were designed in the 80s. Kiosks and related infrastructure have been around for many, many years, and airports are still installing that equipment now. Self-service bag drop, released in Australia, at least in our experience, 11 years ago, is still being deployed and considered new technology. And other than better graphics, flight information displays are the same as they have been for 30 plus years. Boarding passes are still a thing. Paper boarding passes, it does my head in. And then thermal bag tags are being printed in their billions, and yet airports are investing and have been for more than 10 years in RFID. The security process has improved, but realistically, we're still funneling everybody through the same choke point and then allowing them into the sterile area. Having said that, when it comes to the innovation that the airlines are doing, when I look at the Asia Pacific, and that's the area I have experience in, our local carriers are doing some fantastic innovation and really pushing the boundaries of what's possible. I only see this sort of, slowdown in the way we innovate when we start to bring competing airlines together in the same infrastructure in an airport environment. We try and scale this activity or this innovation across multiple airports and airlines, and things start to fall apart. So if I put this perspective, I guess, to one side, FTE and APEX is about celebrating what is possible in the future and taking a very can-do approach to the way things can be done. So each year we celebrate some of the amazing things that are possible in our industry. And right now, I think, yes, they're certainly there, but there's a laser-like focus on cost reduction and efficiency. And I think I've probably set a little bit of a pessimistic tone in my opening comments, but I'm genuinely hoping, and our experience so far is that COVID may be an opportunity for the industry to really embrace change and deliver some fantastic improvements. So with that, I guess, set piece, I'm going to ask Mike to lead off with the carrier's point of view and explain what he thinks next generation airport facilities will look like in the future.
Thanks, David. Maybe I'll take a bit of a different tact in that, particularly here in the US, I do see that the look and the feel of the airports here in this country are going to look different coming out of this. And what I mean by that is, there are a lot of folks have started to return to the skies, but there's a lot more that have yet to join us. And I do think it's incumbent upon the industry, not only globally, but definitely here in the US, to really come together as it pertains to actually accelerating technology and innovation that may have been in its works or in its infancy. And you talked about self-bag drop and things have been in Asia Pacific and in your part of the world for over 11 years. Those are still relatively unproven technologies here in the US. In fact, it was in 2019 where we actually installed the first payment-enabled self-bag drop at LaGuardia. And we were considered pioneers by doing that, and we did that really to sort of automate a lot of the routine transactions, which many of our colleagues have seen throughout the world. But up until this point, I mean, it hasn't really been prolific here in the US. And one of the things we were working on before COVID, sort of moving our way to the airports of the future, or maybe the airports across the world, if you will, is we actually implemented a domestic one-to-one biometric photo matching solution, which again in this marketplace is a game changer. And what I mean by that is we have the ability in this new world to actually use something as simple as a state driver's license to sort of verify somebody's ID using this at a self bag drop. And while again this is maybe not innovative across the world, because let's face it, the advent of or the reality of actually here in the US with TVS and CBP, and there's a big partnership between that for international travel. I mean, using biometrics and your face as a token for travel. We see that in parts of the world, but within the domestic US, there really wasn't or hasn't been a framework to really push the innovation of self-bag drop forward. And so I'm pleased to say we created it. And as a result of COVID, I think we're going to accelerate it. And just to sort of put it in context, how it works. In the US, you're not allowed to check in up until, you're only allowed to check in about 24 hours in advance, okay? I know in other jurisdictions, you can check in up to 30 days in advance. And so you talked about boarding passes and you talked about, all this infrastructure associated with kiosks. Part of that's predicated, in my opinion, based on the regulatory regime. And so the regulatory regime very much dictates or throttles your innovation. And so today, if a guest wanted to use our technology, up to 24 hours in advance, you're getting your boarding pass on the app, you're going to a kiosk, you're printing a bag tag. Today, even in this sort of interim environment, I still have to manually verify that ID as per my regulatory requirement before somebody enters, a semi-sterile area associated with self bag drop. But of course, once there, a guest can opt in or opt out to a biometric solution. And then, of course, if they opt in, we take a photo capture, and ultimately, once a match is made, the process carries on. One of the great things about this technology today is, of course, if you do have to make a payment and, for an overweight bag or things of that nature, we can do it right on the machine. That's really, really important because today, we don't necessarily want to send a guest to another queue. And we certainly want to, as best as possible, minimize face-to-face interaction with our guests. And so we sort of started out on one path, thinking about efficiencies, and we sort of found this new benefit as it pertains to minimizing that face-to-face interaction. And what's also different about what we've done is we're not actually using a database. So we're not sharing information with regulatory authorities of that nature. Obviously, there's oversight and there's requirements that we need to meet and they need to evaluate the efficacy of the technology. But ultimately, this is a one-to-one solution. And so this is, quite frankly, simple innovation to help us leap forward much further. And I guess the one thing I would say, in a post-COVID world, what we really need support, and I appreciate being on a panel with technology providers and infrastructure, thought leaders, is, this is kind of expensive stuff. It was expensive before COVID.
Yep.
And of course, with demand being what it is, we need that partnership. And specifically, we need airports to step up and help with things like construction and baggage handling integration. We'll bring thought leadership. We'll bring our expertise to the table, but you touched on it earlier. I think we're going to need an open-mindedness from the airport authorities around the world, because many airlines will come with their solution. And this is where there's a conflict with the common use infrastructure, because a one-size-fits-all model has historically worked when we all kind of operated on a ticket counter, but that's changing. And so today, each airline has to certify on all these various platforms. Well, quite frankly, that's a big financial burden for us right now. And so we think that we ultimately are looking for like a hybrid approach to allow airlines to come in with their own technology. Let us do that, partner with us financially. We think in the short term, there's benefit around reinstilling confidence. And we think in the long term, we're going to move more people through the facility with the same relative footprint. And that's been proven worldwide already. So that's not a big stretch of the imagination. So I'll leave it at that. I'll pass it along to my colleagues. But ultimately, we're definitely looking for that sort of partnership from the community at large.
Brilliant, Mike. Thank you. That's a couple of really useful points in there that I'd like to pick up later on. Chris, Mike's obviously set you up beautifully to talk about some of the innovations your company and broader you're seeing across the industry. I wonder if you could just lead us through that.
Sure, thank you. It's spot on. Let me, I'll share a presentation very quickly. Okay, can you see that okay?
Perfect.
Okay, so yeah, quickly, and I think Mike hit it at perfect points. There's a lot of the technology kind of existed that will help the airport of the future existed pre-COVID. It's just that the implementation was, inconsistent, often slow or sporadic regionally. I think that the COVID pandemic is going to result in the acceleration of adoption of those technologies, and it also brought out a couple of new needs, the requirements for new technologies that we'll quickly walk through. The first in terms is cloud computing. Again, this is something that existed pre-COVID. It was starting to be implemented, common use type of systems, as you said in your introduction, David, was, it's been around for a long time, and it was slow evolution. And cloud is really changing that paradigm. It brings a number of benefits to the industry that didn't exist before. It's quite honestly, it's simpler to deploy and support in a agile DevOps type of environment, in reference to the older way, which was kind of waterfall development, heavy on-site deployment type of cost infrastructure. The application performance consistency, it's not dependent because it's basically the same application within the cloud that everyone is using. You get the same consistency in the way that works. Instead of, we used to hear airlines say, applications works one way in one airport and a different way in another airport. It's enhanced security. PCI compliance, for the credit card industry is significantly easier to achieve once you get the PCI attestation within the cloud, and then it's a lot less work within the airport environment. It's provision anywhere. It's a single pane of glass. This is especially important for airport ownership groups who have multiple airports. Instead of having autonomous airports reporting remotely, you can actually see the operations of your IT systems from a central headquarters office. And from an airline point of view, it's more cost efficient. It's connect once, deploy many. You don't have to have these expensive connections into each airport core room to get connecting into your departure control system. But I think most importantly for cloud is that COVID has highlighted it is more cost efficient. It's a shared service. There's no big core rooms. It's much easier and cheaper to deploy and maintain. And so it's also very scalable. And that's become very important. When we saw the swings in passenger counts that COVID has impacted, airlines and airports, they want to know that, if their passenger traffic goes down, they need their systems or IT systems to scale down with them, both in terms of scalability, in terms of the infrastructure and the cost. Same as the opposite. As things start to improve, they need the ability to quickly scale up and have that charge basis based on that. So cloud computing is one of the areas that I think will significantly accelerate adoption post-COVID. The second one is the change in the airport campus. A lot of the technology, and again, David, you highlighted this, doesn't necessarily have to take place on the airport campus. mobile app check-in has been around for quite a while, but the ability to do automated bag drop off airport, whether it's at a parking facility, it's rental car facilities, hotels, train stations, cruise centers. By doing that, that is actually going to take a lot of the queuing and the processing away from the airport. And with COVID, that is important. Queuing is bad for COVID. I mean, you cannot maintain social distancing. By being able to do these processes off airport will significantly help that process. And we have the perfect example is the Disney World does the Magical Express. The ability to basically drop your bag at your hotel in the morning, and basically you pick it up at your destination airport, or in some cases, in some countries, you can actually pick up at your, your home location or whatever hotel you're going through. And so that just makes the whole process easier. And that was something that existed beforehand. It was part of the IATA Next initiative, and I think that will accelerate post-COVID as well. The next we talk about is biometrics. Again, this is the IATA One ID program. Biometrics has been around for a while. Inbound border control had been around for quite a many years. On the outbound, you have the added complexity of a number of passenger touch points and the need to integrate with the airline systems. In the US, it was most visible in terms of the CBP exit program, but it wasn't really on the other touch points. We've seen different areas throughout the world, limited deployments or single touch point trials. I think you're going to now see the full end-to-end passenger journey, the curb to gate, the whole ability to basically enroll on your mobile phone and link up your boarding pass, your ID, whether it's a passport, whether it's a state or local ID type of that, and with your biometrics, and that will be your journey. And the great thing about this is that with the COVID, the business case existed pre-COVID. It's a better passenger experience. It is more secure. It gets more throughput through the airport, but now it's also contactless. And so now it provides a contactless journey. So I think you'll see that acceleration within the airport environment going forward as well. And we're already starting to see that with an increased number of airport RFPs that originally were, we just want to do bag drop, or we just want to do boarding. Now we're seeing the full curb to gate, international, domestic passengers, the whole lot. I think one technology that is a result of COVID is the need for physiological screening within the airport. Now, there's a couple of areas that are being looked at. Temperature checks are being implemented. The issue with temperature checks is limited utility. It doesn't, catch pre-symptomatic passengers who are infectious. It doesn't capture asymptomatic, and you can get false positives. We've also seen the thought of doing rapid testing within the airport environment. Now, while rapid testing may help get passenger numbers back up, if we want to get to 2019 levels and beyond in terms of passengers, that's just not viable economically or from an airport process. I've also seen, there's a lot of discussions on health passports. The problem with that is, one, it has to be globally interoperable. You have to have trust in terms of the labs that these tests are coming from. There's time constraints. You could have a 1 hour domestic flight or a 20-hour, international flight that you're worrying about. And there's data privacy. What we believe is that there's going to be need for a layered approach within an airport that has multiple biomarkers, we're calling them. And we work with medical and academic institutions and saying, if you can do the cross measurement of temperature, saturated blood oxygen level, and respiratory rate, get those three biomarkers within 10 seconds or less with a non-invasive type technology, then you'll be able to get the vast majority of screening within the airport environment, a quick yes or no, you can proceed, or no, you need to go to a secondary screening, which would be a confirmatory test like a rapid COVID test. That way, if you can actually implement that into current processes like the single token IDs, the same cameras that are being used for biometrics can be used for this multi-sensor biomarkers. And as part of your normal journey, if you can actually have that quick test, and therefore you limit the number of people that need to have that secondary test, you can actually have that. And the best thing about this is it's future proof. This type of system is not looking for COVID specifically, it's looking for infectious respiratory diseases. And so whether it would be, in the past, a SARS or a MERS or COVID or any type of thing, it's going to be a screening device that says this may be an infectious respiratory disease that needs a secondary confirmation. And then the final is the discussion is the airport digital transformation. The industry is in the different phases of this transformation. Basically, you're going from using data for data's sake just to kind of run the application and the process that you're doing. And now you're basically looking at data for basically now having the ability to do analysis to improve operations. And most importantly, when you get to a more mature phase, you actually want it to be predictive. You know, we looked at, example would be like gate management. You know, right now, most gate management systems are kind of reactive, that you have conflicts of two aircraft coming, you know, an aircraft still on the gate and another one that was scheduled to be on the gate is sitting on a tarmac waiting. But if you can start making those systems predictive, knowing that thunderstorms in city A will probably cause conflicts in city B 4 hours later, you can start actually adjusting your gate allocations and avoid those and save a lot of money, you know, in terms of fuel burn. So in summary, those are the technologies. One of the things we looked at, if you're looking at the airport of the future, we believe that these are the 6 primary technology foundations that need to underlie those IT systems. And we suggest do an audit. You know, look at these type of, and if you look at your IT systems and your applications and self-assess on where you are, that would kind of give you a good idea on where you are in terms of your digital transformation, about how these type of, this technology foundation is widespread within your airport and airline environment. And with that, thanks for the time, and I'll throw it back to Antoinette.
All right, Chris, thank you very much. Again, like Mike, a heck of a lot to dig into, and I don't know if we'll have time to explore all of it. Antoinette, your business has a global perspective, a bit like Chris's. I wonder if you could show us or explain to us some of the challenges that you're seeing across the industry right now, and how we're going to evolve in the future.
Certainly, thank you, David. Yeah, I'll just click on my presentation. There we go. Well, yes, certainly for us, and it's very interesting, you know, and a good segue from you know, where we're talking about technology. You know, we create the space around the process and creating passenger experience. And certainly for us, you know, there's principles, I suppose, that we've always tried to achieve in terms of passenger experience, and, you know, clarity, intuitive wayfinding, simple and easy processes that you can navigate your way through. And, you know, and as I carry on talking, you know, we're always looking at the passenger experience, and as you say, technology is absolutely key. And you know, it's interesting that the conversations that we're having, and as you're all talking about, the things that we've all been looking at and talking about, it's something we've always been looking towards. And you just sort of think, when you come to a crisis like this, you actually find that there's more of an incentive to try and push it forward. You know, we're sort of, you know, as a result of this crisis, it's becoming all the more important to start to sort of consider how we can make this work and get the customer confidence back. And that's absolutely key. I think, you know, the big challenge is obviously going to be customer confidence. And so creating spaces and places that, you know, going to help them is going to be very, very important. And I guess the one thing that we're sort of saying that might change in all of that experience is, you know, has just been discussed, you know, what might be happening in terms of the screening at the airport, the space requirements that might be associated with all of that, and just sort of running through all the different things that, you know, will still be and probably be of big concern. You know, that it still has to be very convenient for the passenger, intuitive, that seamless one ID that we've all been sort of trying to push for, but also personalization, you know. So, you know, nowadays, you know, through everything we do with our smart devices, we want to personalize our experience. So whatever spaces that we create or places, we want to make sure that people can feel that they can navigate it the way they want to navigate it. But feel very, very safe and also very, very secure as they work through. And so just sort of talking about, you know, all the things, you know, how we might integrate those. The other aspect of it, not just the technology, is also, you know, the types of space that we create, that visual connectivity, you know, the calmness that people feel when they know where they're going on their journey, but also natural ventilation. A lot of people have been very concerned through this crisis about clean and healthy environments. So it's something to sort of consider. And bringing into that technology piece as well, the whole shopping aspect of it, because obviously, you know, with the challenges around revenues, still trying to maintain ways in which, you know, revenue can be generated has to be considered, and how technology can sort of support that. Sorry, going the wrong way. And as I say, you know, that pre-flight screening will start to place other demands potentially on how we plan our spaces, the sort of distances that we need, to create these sort of processes and to accommodate the sort of technology that might be in play, but then increase that opportunity again through the technology to navigate, through facilities. And then when we plan the sort of spaces, you start to think about, the seating areas. We're talking about having more private seating pods. Are we having air purification systems, greening of the space, which again helps make people feel that they're in a healthy environment and make them feel more comfortable. And maybe even, integrating more outdoor, naturally ventilated spaces as well. And, every point that someone touches, we to make that sort of touchless as much as possible, with the least interaction perhaps with people. So again, people feel very calm and very, very comfortable about their experience. And I think there are things that we always do, and again, just come to the fore now when we're in this sort of new context. And certainly sort of when we talk about universal design, which is actually a design principle evolved out of the US, it's still trying to make sure whatever we do, it's sort of equitable space, very simple, very perceptible, and as I say, very, very easy to navigate. And I mentioned that healthy environment, so wellness, and when you start to look at these places, spaces, the air that people breathe, what's on offer in terms of nourishment, the quality of the light, the opportunity for sort of a healthy environment in terms of fitness perhaps as well, choices to take lifts, not escalators, and stairs and not lifts, and have sort of a comfortable and perhaps stimulating as well environment as well. And that's certainly, something that we've looked at in the past, whether it was in Hong Kong, and these principles have been in play, but just sort of moving into the next level. And certainly one of the other aspects of this, and this is what we were looking at when we're doing Mexico City Airport, is trying to sort of define spaces that have flexibility within them. Because one of the things we always say in a sort of motto of our practice is the only constant is change. And certainly when we design airports, we find that that's the one thing that, there's things that keep coming back, whether it's a retail environment, security, and now it may be the health screening, demands that you have very, very flexible architecture to allow you to adapt spaces. One other thing that was sort of mentioned as part of this topic is sort of placemaking. And is there something that still comes into play, even if we're in this sort of dealing with these crises? Is it still important that we start to define our airport terminals that are really talking about place or culture? And these are just some examples of where there's been a very strong integration of ideas around placemaking, around that sort of gateway creation. And each time we do it, we find, in fact, what we're coming back to sort of create these sort of responses is really, really about climate. And I'll come on to climate because, whilst we've all been talking around, the sort of, what's hitting us right now, and perhaps we're hoping is a sort of short-term issue we have to deal with, and some of those issues will probably become permanent. But coming back into the sort of long-term view, the big questions are going to be, what's going to drive, the next generation of airports. Biometrics, for us, I think, as designers, hugely, hugely important, because whilst we're talking about potentially the impact of these technologies and/or processes might demand more space or different types of space, depending on the capacity issues, we always find with biometrics as an opportunity to optimize space as well. So certainly that's what we found in a number of terminals where we've been able to sort of combine flows to reduce the actual demand. And, increasing use of other technologies like robotics can actually, minimize the sort of demand on space. And coming back to that healthy issue about being able to screen. And as we start to look at autonomous vehicles, again, there's technologies out there that are constantly working through to try and optimize process and optimize the space demand. And space equals cost in construction, obviously, and also in terms of operational costs as well. But coming on to the sort of climate issue, before this crisis, this was at the forefront of the conversation for us. And I think people have seen through this crisis, their perception that in fact we could have clearer skies, we could have clearer atmospheres. So people are actually saying, I don't want to go back to where I was. And so I think we're sort of getting messages, certainly, that what we were trying to sort of deal with in terms of aviation's contribution to global emissions, is still at the forefront of what we have to sort of start to consider. And certainly, for us, this has been an evolution. So everything we do and every airport we look at, we find that we're learning and learning with every step of the way how that we can achieve things. And what we do is obviously what's on the ground, when I'm not talking about what happens in the air. And examples of following the ACA, the Airport Carbon Accreditation System, working through projects that actually, achieve this through firstly, passive design, and then we move into sort of systems to achieve that. And examples like this in Kuwait, which is under construction at the moment, which is at every level in terms of its passive design and its systems, as I say, and generation and planting and water management, and even from a master planning perspective to sort of optimize taxiing and idling, is all driving through to sort of optimize. And even the architecture here, which is sort of shading the aircraft and the bridges. So sort of finishing up on sort of other example in Marseille, the sort of carbon issue is sort of become very, very important to the front. And what we've been driving to do in our airports, and I'll just show you a little quick tool that I think is interesting to see, is to actually start to find tools. And this is BIM technology. We use BIM to document and draw, and we do embodied carbon and analysis as we work through our design with global standards around the carbon that they carry, and then we do our sort of system selection as we go through to try and optimize the design at every level and achieve more sustainable buildings and architecture. So that's a quick example. And just to finish, just to say, we have to deal with the issues, the short-term issues, hopefully, to do with the pandemic, but we have to start to sort of look forward towards the issues around climate as well. Thank you.
Wow. Okay. So I have three panelists who are clearly experts in their fields, who have talked passionately and very informed about a very broad array of topics. This is going to take quite some effort to unpack. So bear with me. We've got about 20-25 minutes to try and even dig into one of those topics. So I'll jump in straight away, if I may, to automation, technology and biometrics. This is future travel experience. And then we'll lead on into looking at the built form, as Antoinette's already alluded to. I'm just wondering, Mike, whether you could give us some insights into how automation is really coming into the industry. Clearly, from the airport's perspective, if it delivers faster, cheaper, safer services and improves the customer experience that we wanted. But I also think there's some real challenges in doing it in the airport environment. Mike picked up some points about the airlines wanting to bring their own technology into the airport. We allow that to an extent, but at some point, if you're looking at an airport that, say, Antoinette's just finished designing, 13 million passengers, maybe 20 airline, operating in there as well. How do you actually make that work? And then I'd like to jump to Mike to see how his perspective is. How do we interoperate into a very confined space with multiple carriers that have similar but not complementary technologies? So Chris, if you could just start off.
Sure. Obviously, certainly the technologies need to be interoperable. A lot of the technologies, I think Mike, or you pointed out earlier on, that you basically have to write an application for each different vendor. And so all the technologies have to go towards common, simple API interfaces. And it's incumbent on the vendor providers also to provide almost like information brokers, basically platforms that allow integration of different technologies or different applications seamlessly without having an airline or an airport to develop independent applications that have to fit each of the different vendor community out there. So I think that is key. And that is, if you look at a lot of the IATA or ACI type of initiatives, it is more common interfaces and common technologies rather than proprietary technologies that are going to be the specifications of the future. The simple things like common use web services, that's a perfect example of initiative to make it much easier to not have to have bespoke developments for every different vendor that's out there.
So Mike, clearly that's looking at, I guess, a large-scale integration perspective. Does Spirit look at it from that point of view, or are you looking at more conventional technologies that might be used in other industries and trying to redeploy them to the aviation sector?
Yeah, no, I really like what Chris had to say in terms of making it easier. I can tell you today in the US, it's not. It's not easy. There's multiple different common use providers. And in terms of the hardware and the technology that they're bringing, forward, it's all at different levels of sophistication. And so, Spirit, quite frankly, is more of a leader in this space in the US. Doing things like biometrics and payment enabled, whereas another airline, they may not do either of those things. They may not even want to do those things. So we would need a platform that's flexible enough, obviously, as Chris alluded to sort of subscription, more of a subscription-like service that it's there available to us. The benefit is you could diffuse the cost of that investment over multiple carriers. I think the pushback you're going to have here in the US is there's many airlines that are not going to want to sign up for that. And that's why I was advocating a bit of a hybrid model in this marketplace at this time. I think, some of the things that you talked about earlier in terms of, Asia Pacific and Australia, I mean, it's much further along in its common use evolution. And so I think in those jurisdictions, I think there's probably much more of an opportunity to do more so what Chris is talking about. I think we're a little further away from that in the US. You talked about wanting to be a bit controversial, so I guess I threw it out there.
Terrific. Well, if I pick up your example, we have a low-cost carrier. Unfortunately, it's just disappeared due to COVID, but they were insistent upon reducing the effort for their check-in staff, as well as redeploying those staff when they weren't needed. So they were walking around with iPads. They were interrogating customers and assisting them well before they got to the check-in counter, or for a disrupt, a delayed flight or whatever, they would actually walk to the gate and say, listen, who has a problem? Or they'd ping them with a message and say, come and see me, I'm in gate X. That disrupted the way the airport viewed the use of the infrastructure, but at the same time made perfect sense from the airline's point of view. Mm-hmm. When we look at our check-in hall, we've had bag drop, as I said, since 2009. We still haven't deployed a complete kiosk and bag drop solution because our partners aren't ready for it. So we have some who have been screaming at us, please put in more capacity, please put in more automation, through to others saying, we are a high touch carrier, we do not want this. And when it comes to managing that infrastructure, it's, from a technology point of view, it's extremely challenging, but it also from, a built form, we are in the middle of a terminal expansion. And we've been challenging ourselves, how much of this should we allocate to future technology now? How much do we still keep in the 70s and 80s because some partners demand this? And Antoinette, I'm just wondering how you're trying to solve this at even new airports that you're looking to build right now.
It's very interesting because we certainly encountered that in several places, and we're always trying to think about that customer experience. And for us, if you could get the technology sorted out and get that commonality, then we know it could potentially improve everybody's experience. So what we do find is and it's horses for courses. It's so cultural. So in one place, as you say, we find that it's the airlines that are driving it. And if you get some airlines that really, really want to push it, then they might influence others to say, hang on, yeah, we've got to sort of step up and do this too. And we're going to do that. Certainly in Mexico City was very interesting, where we had, 4 carriers in that space, sort of home carriers, getting them all around the table and having that conversation. But what we ended up doing was having a kit of parts solution for each of the check-in zones. And it was to allow them, as some were evolving at different stages, to be able to come back and refit and implement as they started to move through their own, development. And it sort of seems a bit trite to say, but obviously, we have to be cognizant that people are going to be evolving at different stages, and we've got to design space that will allow them to evolve and to accommodate their needs.
So Mike, as a leader in North America and for a lot of the technologies you've talked about, how do you see the human piece that sits in all of this as well? A lot of the people that are traveling on your airlines demand or expect some level of support from humans. Are you stripping out all of that and then leaving them with no support, or how do you balance that, efficiency and the majority of the customers wanting self-service, but at the same time dealing with customers who really do need help?
Yeah, so roughly speaking today, about 80% of our guests use self-serve channels, and about 20% interact sort of face-to-face with one of our team members. There's always going to be an element or an aspect of face-to-face contact. We do have to deal with, late guests, or we've got issues with, international documentation. So you're always going to need some degree of human touch, care, empathy, and I don't think we want to lose sight of that. Just because we're racing towards automation and sort of the mobilization of the traveler. So it really is a balance, and for us, we offer choice. And ultimately, if it's 80% today, I anticipate that grows as we roll forward.
So Antoinette, when you were talking during your presentation, you also mentioned how Biometrics is enabling the built form, and I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that, because clearly automation we've touched on, and then biometrics being the next piece in that kind of automation and touchless activity. How is it influencing airport design?
Well, it was very interesting when we were designing Mexico City Airport that it was going to be a very large facility, and one of the key things that we did there was to actually combine our international and outbound international and domestic flows, so domestic outbound and inbound. So we took a whole level of segregation away from that process, and that was all to do through biometrics at the gate. So the only segregated channel we had was the international arrivals. Wow. So that was a significant space saver, as you can imagine, by using that technology to sort of control that. But also, the other added benefit was the number of people that then were going to pass through all the retail opportunities. And so from that perspective, everyone thought, well, there was a greater opportunity to, capture that spend as well. So, and at the time when we started the process, there weren't any biometric passports in Mexico as well. So, through that project and the opportunities that the government saw there, that they sort of introduced that as a big program to run in parallel. So, as I say, if you've got to, deal with two things, which is, the capital cost of your infrastructure, but also, the management of that space, and also the opportunity to, get sort of revenue and spend, then biometrics, you can see, could be very, very helpful.
Interesting. If I look, I guess, slightly more broadly to how we operate as an industry, I'm just thinking about off-airport check-in, and in Australia, we have a company called Oasis Off-Airport Check-In Services, and they deploy to events, even to, I guess, queue bust at airports. We've had them in our forecourt at peak times dealing with over capacity demands. Chris, I'm just wondering if you can give us some insights into where you're seeing that kind of activity being facilitated. Clearly, cloud technologies, as you mentioned, enable off-airport check-in. Realistically, what else can we see coming into that space over the next 2 months or years to enable broader adoption of that technology or that process?
Yeah, so that's a great point. And the technology is actually there. There's not a lot of change in technology. What you do within the airport campus, you can do off-site at the campus, the same type of technology. It's clear that typically off campus, you're going to have a single entity, if it's at a hotel, it may be hotel staff or a vendor, like a baggage transportation vendor in the US, for example, Bags does the Disney Magical Express. So they're not going to be able to learn 20 different airline applications. So you need a single application that will work with multiple airlines to have that interoperability. But a lot of it, and kind of what we talked about, it's governmental regulations that allow that, that allow the ability and have certifications to have that safe transfer of baggage from off campus into the sterile zone within the airport environment. There are places, perfect example is Hong Kong Airport. There's a lot of check-in that happens, in train stations, city centers, so forth. So it's not so much about technology, it's about the process and regulation to make this happen. And I think, again, I think that the result of the pandemic, I think that will kind of accelerate acceptance of those type of processes.
So Mike, clearly that adds complexity to your business. Is that something that Spirit or even just you see as the, I guess, the major carriers are going to embrace in the future?
Yeah, so prior to the pandemic, we have a couple of offsite places where we accept bags. So cruise ports, as an example, car rental facility in Tampa, and our bags are moved from the airport in Orlando to Walt Disney World. So we conceptually I like it, and we're in favor of it from a guest experience perspective. I think maybe where we differ a little bit is as a low-cost carrier, I either need to reduce my costs of labor in terms of processing and facilitation at the airport in order to support that, and/or I need some sort of cost share model that allows me to do it at best no more than what I pay today, or alternatively as actually an ancillary option as somebody who wants to pay for the service. So while I like it, I would like it personally as a guest or as a customer. If I put my ULCC hat on, it's got to pay for itself, or it's got to reduce my costs. Otherwise, I'm not really interested in doing it in the short term. That may evolve over the near term to the long term, but ultimately, all of the things that we do have to stand on their own from a business case perspective.
Yep, and again, from an airport's point of view, we're struggling with that as well, because the way our terminal was originally built, and I suspect most existing terminals, was that the baggage system was contained within the airport terminal itself. There are no sort of easy, secure ways to import large amounts of luggage that's either pre-tagged or has to be tagged before it goes in. So we're looking at the complexity of bringing in international, domestic and regional all into one terminal and somehow safely and securely integrating it into our baggage system. It's not a trivial activity, and it's not impossible by any stretch of the imagination, but it is expensive, especially considering baggage systems usually sit in the heart of the terminal and nowhere near transportation that's really convenient. So I can see a lot of challenges of bringing or disaggregating that activity and bringing it further and further away or taking it further away from the airport, and adding complexity to the airport, and unfortunately for our partners, often extra cost. So that's why I was really quite intrigued with that. Antoinette, I guess you're seeing, sorry, go ahead, please, Chris.
Yeah, sorry, just to jump in. That's a great point. And when we've met with people, we've encouraged, because there's a lot of benefits, not just to the airline, to the airport, there's benefits to the hotels and so forth, that if people know their baggage is checked, they'll stay longer, they'll spend more money, and so we've actually engaged, when we start talking about off airport, we've engaged like tourism bureaus and city commerce or state and local type commerce, saying you should really kind of pitch into this because you're getting economic benefit as well, and not put all the burden on an airport or an airline financially.
Antoinette, you might have some statistics, but I recall once the new Hong Kong airport was built, there was a long allowance that customers made to get to the airport to go by taxi. But once they became confident with the mass rapid transit, that the actual arrival and presentation of the airport became very, very tight, because people had so much confidence they could drop their bag in the city and then catch the train, within a few minutes of plus or minus be right at the airport. Do you see off-airport check-in and those sort of processes changing the way we have to look to design airport terminals to handle that kind of, I guess, late presentation and very confident presentation of customers, knowing full well that the majority of the process is already done behind the scenes at another location?
Well, I think to your point, that the fact that everything's sort of centralized at the moment into the terminal building, you're building very expensive facilities, and baggage, people think it's terribly boring because I always talk about passenger experience, but I often say, to those in the business, actually baggage drives terminal design, because it's the nervous system, and it's pumping everything around the building. So, that drives the design and that drives the cost of the facilities. So if you can sort of disaggregate that and actually make very much cheaper facilities somewhere else, and you increase the percentage of people who are shipping it through that method, then perhaps you can actually reduce the cost of your facilities as well. So there could be benefits, and I think as you start to look to expand your facilities, instead of keep driving up the cost and capital cost of those facilities, find cheaper ways to do it and use those sorts of processes to facilitate it.
So I guess if we stay a little bit in the built form for right now, it's certainly in our airport, we are one of the leaders in building a completely integrated terminal. We have international, domestic and regional all in one space. And we've been exploring some of the things that Antoinette talked about with biometrics to self-separate rather than physically separate customers. There's still some challenges with that, but we're now halfway through or more now, I suspect, through completing our terminal expansion. In 2021, it'll be open. And I'm trying to work out what we should be allowing for in the next year or two. And I'm looking to the panel to give me some ideas and some incentives on which direction I should be pushing and discussing with our team on how we can move this forward. I'm intrigued by health checking, clean environments and revenue generation. They all make perfect sense. I'm kind of, I guess, conflicted with the idea that we'll have self-isolation areas. Most of the customers we're traveling right now are addicted to their phones and wouldn't have a clue who's in front of them already. So I am a little anxious about separating them even further from reality. But I guess I might just start with Chris. And Chris, can you give me some ideas of, how are we going to deal with the new normal now and the next new normal that's coming through, I guess, from a customer facilitation perspective inside of our terminal environments?
Yeah, I'll hit, I think, two main points. One, I think the reality is you're going to have some type of secondary screening capabilities within your facility, and how that's integrated into your ConOps is going to be a challenge. But the other one is, even as we're talking about biometrics in its fairly early stages, we're already looking at what's next for biometrics. And I think what's going to be critical is what's called walking pace biometrics. Today's biometrics, you walk up and regardless of the point, you have to go up and stand and wait, be static. And that typically causes queuing. The ability, whether it's health screening or whether it's biometrics, I think it's going to have to evolve into where it's more of a walking flow. And so that way you kind of start dispersing automatically, naturally, passengers and travelers rather than having it queue up at different ones. Because what you don't want is that technology that causes more queues. And I think walking pace scanning, whether it's biometrics or health, is going to be a requirement in the future to kind of keep the flows going.
Chris, if I pick up on that point, how are you going to allow people like Mike to use their personal or their company's biometric systems in a broader environment like a terminal?
Yeah, the challenge is, and two challenges. One is standards, and what typically happens with new technologies, the vendors are usually in front of the standards, and so we're going to have to figure out a way to work with the different industry associations and actually in governmental regulations, regulatory agencies to kind of come up with certain standards that they know that they're not going to have to develop different applications or different processes. And then it says the vendor community, knowing that standards often lag behind, we have to build in interoperability. That we know that there's going to be different levels of maturity and different levels of application capabilities that we're going to have to build in the ability, a middle layer per se, that allows easy integration. So there's not a lot of work hitting costs from the airline or airport point of view that they have to keep on recertifying or redeveloping their applications and processes.
I'm going to jump direction slightly, Mike. I'm really intrigued to know from a LCC's or ultra low cost carriers point of view what sense of place means for you. Looking at new terminal design, I'm probably going to leave it to Antoinette to tell me what a terminal should look like from a sense of place, but I have a suspicion that the LCCs are more interested in efficiency than they are in sense of place. And I'm intrigued to know how you're going to deal with this as we start to build more and more complexity into the travel journey, but at the same time try and improve the way the customer experience is as we disrupt them with health checks and all other activities.
Right. So I'm going to definitely leave it to Antoinette and Chris to sort of build out this placemaking. I thought some of the images that Antoinette put up were beautiful. I thought some of the airports were, you know, they looked amazing, and they looked like places I'd want to go hang out. I can say, you know, here in the U.S., where 90% of our operations are based in the U.S., quite frankly, we just want a terminal facility that's clean, that, you know, instills confidence, you know, in the traveler, and that's through, you know, various antimicrobial treatments and disinfectant and all those types of things. And whether it's UV light and other innovation, we're all in support of that. But really, we just want our guests to be able to go through the terminal without having to stop and wait repeatedly. We want them to be able to go on and board the aircraft cleanly and with low stress. So the placemaking around it, again, I'll defer to my colleagues. What I will say is, you know, as an ultra low cost carrier, we want to make sure that we're not overbuilding and we're not creating too much infrastructure that ultimately the airlines, at least in this country, you know, ultimately bear, you know, in terms of rates and charges, we bear the expense. And so we want to balance our own desire for innovation and ease of use from a facilitation standpoint with building out some of these pretty fantastic facilities.
Antoinette, you showed some of your clients that clearly have very deep pockets. Do you have some that are also looking to try and satisfy Mike's and that kind of business model?
Well, actually, they aren't deep pockets, and I don't think there's any client that we do have that, you know, doesn't sort of recognise the value of space. So, good design and the character that you build into design doesn't have to cost money. So, you know, Beijing, it's a very large facility, but it's a very simple space frame structure, and it's a coat of paint and the color of the columns, and you've transformed, you know, something to sort of represent a character of place. But, you know, I totally agree with Mike. You know, our approach to design is around, it has to start with, as I say, customer experience, the flows, getting the efficiency right. If you don't get that right, you know, you don't have a happy airline, you don't have a happy airport operator, and you don't have a happy customer. So, you know, those are absolutely key. But, you know, and love to show you, you know, in more detail how, you know, you can actually achieve, you know, good quality environments without it being costly. But I can actually tell it's absolutely possible. So it's about the thinking. And as I sort of said before, I think the difference with each one of those projects, when it comes down to climate drives the responses, you know, so, you know, whether you're in Asia, you know, North America, South America, the Middle East, you have to sort of, the materiality, which starts to create the character of place, is driven by climate response.
I think from our perspective, you know, here in the US, we're just looking for airports to support and facilitate our technology deployments. Because again, we think it benefits them in the short term and in the long term. We think it benefits us, and it moves the industry forward here. And I think that's really, really important. So I will leave it at that. I'll hand it over to Antoinette.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess there's three things that we think that we have to do, you know, as designers and designers of airports, and that is create facilities and experiences that will, you know, going forward, improve that customer confidence. And also for the airports themselves, facilities that can improve their economic stability. And as I say, the third most important thing is about the environment. And so providing facilities that will deal with the environmental issues and be of quality performance as well. Thank you.
Chris.
Yep, and then from, you know, obviously from a vendor perspective, we know even more important post-COVID is cost efficiency and scalability. We believe that, you know, there's shared infrastructure helps that, but also realizing that it cannot add hidden costs to airports or airlines. And also we understand airlines need to keep their brand. And so it kind of goes back to that hybrid model, making sure that we can deliver technology that is more scalable, is more cost efficient, but doesn't add costs or impinge on a brand.
I'd just like to thank the panel. They've been really, really helpful. They've given me some new ideas on how to fit into, I guess, the new normal and prepare ourselves for the next new normal after that. From an airport's perspective, I'm getting the vibe that hyper price sensitivity of our airline partners is going to be the norm. Clearly more digital engagement, infrastructure light models wherever possible, acknowledging Antoinette's comments about the built form and how we can actually improve that, even at relatively low cost. and more common use services that that Chris has spoken about. Thank you very much for panel, to all of you for being involved in this. I've learned a heck of a lot, and I hope the viewers also have.